Sawabona. Sikona. Aloha. Shalom. How are other ways in which we greet each other? Asalagaleum. How else? Buenos dias. Jumbo. What culture? Kenya, Swahili. How else do we greet each other? What's up? How else? Hola. How else? Bonjour. So there are many ways in which we greet each other. That's part of how we begin to create a culture of peace and move beyond biases. We don't know each other. You don't know me, I don't know you. You think you do. It's when Howard was, I'm looking at Howard's thinking, did you take my PowerPoint from my other presentation the other day? So I'm going to take a little bit of a different tack than I normally do. I thought maybe we would do this in terms of being able to ask each other questions and to actually practice some things that we can do to address and create a culture of peace. Because while today we're talking about race, as Howard said, it could have been any other thing about who we are. It could have been about my gender. It could be the fact that I wear glasses. It could be about my height. It could be about where I come from. I'm a first-generation American born in the shadow of the Statue of Liberty to immigrants. What did I tell you before? Same story, told differently. Same story told differently. It's a different perspective. When I do work with the military, I always start out with, I'm a first-generation American born in the shadow of the Statue of the Military. All statue of the nation. My folks are military personnel. And all of a sudden, there's a different way in which I'm looked at. As opposed to I'm a first generation born to immigrants. In the tone, you notice the tone. It was a deliberate tone. I said immigrants and went down. Military went up. These are all ways in which our bias, as Howard talked about, begin to take effect. Why am I afraid to tell you who I am? If I tell you who I am and you don't like it, then what do I have? Yeah. Things we can do for peace. We can be open. Part of that openness is going to exactly what Howard just talked about, being aware of what? Our bias. When we become aware of it, we get to choose what we do with it. When we become aware of our bias, we get to choose what we do with it. We can either continue the behaviors that have denied the humanity of others, or we can change that behavior to welcome and embrace, to see the value, the dignity, the love in each other. Unconditional positive regard. I value you for the humanity you bring to bear. When I work with people, encounter people with family, unconditional positive regard. Don't have to agree with you, but I value you for the humanity you bring to bear. Make no assumptions. When we have seen the violence on television over and 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 over again, as Howard said, we're taking what the press is showing us. We're looking at whatever that incident was from the image and the purview from whoever shot it or took it. Has anyone ever witnessed a car accident? And there's 7 people, how many stories? And it could be 12, 14, or 16 if you ask the people again. That's part of the reason why when the police ask you what happened, they separate you. Because now all of a sudden I'm going to hear your story and I'm going to make it part of my story. I didn't even see the whole thing. I heard a rumble and I saw that I was there. And didn't see a thing, but I'm going to be a witness. Because I experienced it. But I experienced it differently. What lens do we look at the world through? We get to choose that lens. Make no assumptions. Has anyone read the 4 agreements? Yes. Anyone? Someone share one of them. What's one agreement?
Always tell the truth.
Okay, that's a good agreement. I'm not sure, is that one of those?
One of the 4?
Of the 4. Always tell the truth. Always, not sometimes.
Not sometimes, always.
Always.
Yeah.
Is that an easy thing to do?
No.
Yeah, okay. What else? What's another one?
Don't take things personally.
Don't take things personally. You know what? Why? Because the world is bigger than me, my I. Sometimes we need to step back. We need to be open, to hear what else is happening. What's another agreement? Yes. Be careful with your word. Be impeccable with your words, because what words have power. The power of words. Howard gave the example. I just love working with Howard. It's my first time ever doing it. I felt like, God, I don't even need to talk. I can just sit down and say ditto. The power of words. We hear things differently. Howard demonstrated that. My godson asked him and showed him a picture of a ladder, Ladder, a ladder. I said, what do you see? He said, a letter. And I said, well, what letter do you see? I heard it differently. He was looking at it, Ladder. I heard him say Letter. We hear things differently. I can say the same thing to you and the same thing to you when you hear it in very different contexts, because your experience with that word may be different than his. Okay? Did we ever get to the fourth agreement? Do the best you can. When? All the time. Yeah. Yeah. And only you know if you're doing the best you can. That's part of being about bringing a culture of peace, regardless of whether we're talking about race. These are some things that we can do. Be present. Why is that important? Why is it important to be present? That's all that's important. Why else is it important to be present? To listen. To be, again, open. Being present. It's having the conversation with someone and you're already thinking about what you want to tell them. Right? You're going because you know what they're going to say, because you got those kind of gifts and powers. I know I do. I can tell you what you're going to say the next time you speak on the topic that I'm familiar with. So I sat there listening to Howard thinking, he took part of my PowerPoint, but he didn't take the whole thing. Because I knew what he was going to say next. Be an ally. I can't believe you used my slide. Have fun. You know, part of this for me is seeing this all the time. But part of it for me is that I've seen it all the time my whole life, because the perspective that I've come from. I'm a black woman in America. When my parents gave me the name Rene, R-E-N-E, they gave the male spelling because they recognized that I needed an advantage. The thinking was that when I sent in my resume and they saw the name R-E-N-E, Rene, and then the name Redwood, they would assume it was a male. So they figured at least I'd get into the door. Because while they came here because they believed in opportunity, they weren't blind to the challenges that we as a nation continue to face. Barbara Jordan said, what the people want is simple. They want an America as good as its promise. Part of that promise is indeed why my parents came here. What is the promise that we see in our society today? Do we see this as an opportunity? All of what we've been seeing on television, in the news, on social media, hearing about, talking about, feeling. How do we use all of this as an impetus for change? What you don't know is I'm a chemist, a scientist. A body at rest will remain at rest until disturbed by an outside force. We as a nation have been at rest when it comes to dealing with issues of race, when it comes to dealing with issues of gender, when it comes to dealing with issues of identity, when it comes to dealing with ability or disability. We've needed an impetus. The question becomes, how much of a push do we need? How many lives have to be lost before we as a nation acknowledge that we have to heal? That our difference indeed is part of our asset. It can be an asset to be leveraged for who we are, not simply to be afraid of. As Howard said, we know difference. It's bias. It's in our brain. You know, it's a left brain function. If you don't have bias, what are you missing? Hello. If you don't have bias, then you're missing a brain. If you're human, because we all have it. But when we become aware of it, what is it that we choose to do with it? Has anyone taken the implicit association test? Yeah. I would encourage that, and I don't think I have the slide up here. Do you have a slide of that with the website? Yeah. Implicit association test, IAT, or the unconscious bias. I encourage each person in here to take it because you can't change what you're not aware of. It allows you to do it in the privacy of your home, while you're sitting in a taxi, It's important tests to take if we truly want to move past some of our bias and to be able to look at who we are for the fullness of who we are. One of the challenges is, can we observe ourselves without judgment? A high spiritual practice is observing ourselves without judgment. If we can begin to do that, then we can begin to observe others without judgment. So within, so without. I judge myself, I judge you. We can have fun with this, because if we don't, it's just too damn painful. It's too painful. I have been sitting in pain every day when I listen to the news. And I think, what am I going to do with this? So when you ask, what am I afraid of? I'm afraid that we won't keep having this conversation. I'm afraid that we will have it now because it's constantly hitting us. And at some point, sadly, the news won't cover it. That was part of the challenge before. How many people said, well, this really isn't happening? It's one or two random instances. Howard showed you 23 ways in which a black person could get murdered. He didn't show you 23 ways in which a LGBT person in the community can get murdered. He didn't show you 23 ways in which a woman can be murdered. He didn't show you 23 ways in which a Christian could be murdered. He didn't show you 20. You could find 23 ways if indeed we choose to look for that. But we can also look for 23 ways in which we can treat each other with dignity and respect, and to be able to move past those things that we fear because they are different. That they're different from me. They make me uncomfortable. Well, guess what? Until you're uncomfortable, you don't change. A body at rest will remain at rest until disturbed by an outside force. What will be that force for you to change your attitude about someone that might be different from you? What will be the force? And hopefully it's becoming aware of what your bias is. That is part of that force that allows you to change how you behave. When you're aware, you get to choose. When you're ignorant, you're stuck. Let's have fun. Through my eyes, I see the world. How do you see the world? So whatever your experience is, when I take off these, it's a whole different world. I used to say my politics were progressive, now it's my glasses. But I see the world. How do I see the world? I see us as one. One earth, one people, one world. I choose to see it that way. It is a choice. It is a choice. But it doesn't mean I don't see the difference in the beauty that we each bring to bear. I see the world through my eyes. What do I see? That we're all human. Part of us being able to move past some of our bias, our prejudgment, is to recognize the humanity, unconditional positive regard. I value you for the humanity you bring to bear. We're all diverse. Who here is not diverse? So again, let's just give ourselves an applause for something we have in common. We're all diverse. We're all, in this case, racial beings. Who is not a racial being? And we could have changed race for anything. We just talked about that. But we're all racial beings. Does that mean that we're all racist? It means that's who we are. We're all unique and have a unique contribution to make. Does anyone else believe that other than me? Yeah. We're all unique and have a unique contribution to make. Turn to the person next to you and tell them what one contribution it is you have to make in this world. Think of just one. I know we all have millions. Gazillions. But pick one. Pick one contribution and share that with someone beside you. Let's take a minute to do that. Share with us what contribution your partner will make. Share with us a contribution your partner will make. Please.
My partner, who's also my husband, his contribution is that he has a very unusual way of looking at the world, and he is incredibly persevering to make things happen.
Persevering to make things happen. But that's good. That's great. Anyone else? A contribution, please. Who is your partner?
My partner, Phyllis.
Okay.
She does nonviolence work in prison.
Nonviolence work. Wow. She could do that out on the streets too. Context. Think about it. Context. What other contributions? Yes, please.
My partners are Michael and Peter. They are kind and gentle.
Kind and gentle. We appreciate that. Do you display that in public too? I'm not saying that facetiously, it's simply a question. Yeah? Not enough. That's something more that we can then begin to do when we're honest with who we are. These are the things, these are the contributions that we can begin to make. Honest and truthful, gentle. I'd love to live in a society where we were a little bit more gentle with one another, regardless of how we looked. Anyone else? Compassion. Compassion. Who's your partner? Do you show, Loretta, the wife, do you show compassion
Absolutely.
in all that you do?
Absolutely.
We appreciate you. Okay. Anyone else? Please. Inspire others with art. Sometimes I know when we have these conversations about STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, I think we forget the A, the STEAM, art, because head without heart is what? Yeah, that's part of our challenge. For the longest time when we've had these conversations about who we are as a nation, who we are as a community, we've spent it in our head. We listen only with our head and our ears. Maybe sometimes we have to listen, see with our heart. Art allows that to be lifted up. Yeah.
Helping people to live their truth.
By clearing their energetic bodies.
Clearing their energetic bodies.
Helping people by clearing their energetic bodies.
Yes.
Live their truth. Helping people live their truth by clearing their energy is neither created nor destroyed, it's simply transformed. How we transform negative energy, how we transform negative perspectives, sometimes we simply have to sit back and rethink it. Take a breath. Count to 10. Yeah. One more. Respect. Respect. Who's your partner? James. See, now you've got a new person you know. James, how do you live respect? Every day. Yeah. Yeah. These are the things we can begin to fill our minds with. How do we, these incredible perseverance, nonviolence, kind, gentle, compassion, inspire, help, clearing our energy, respect. The words we came up with to define and describe the people we most admire and why. These are words that mean something not simply in our head, but who we are in our heart. And if we can begin to live those consistently as my experience, then my interactions begin to change. But these are choices because we do have that available to us. Creating a culture of peace recognizes that we have a choice to do so. We do so by living and lifting our higher selves, these attributes, characteristics, and values. Why did I put the U.S. Women Olympics gymnastics team up here? They're what? They're awesome. Why else, in addition to awesome? What makes them so awesome? Yeah. What were you going to say?
I was going to say, when I look at the picture, you know, there's Simone in the middle, but everybody assumed it was going to be, see, I can't remember her name.
Ollie?
No.
Dominique Gabrielle.
Gabrielle.
Again, the assumptions. What did we just say in the 4 agreements? Make no assumption. Yeah. Why is this, did I show you this? Why else? Diverse. The United States. They're not going to represent a state. Right, we're one. Why we have pride in this picture versus the time when we heard Howard Stern talk about the Rutgers University basketball team. It was still a team. All black. Part of the greatness of this for me is that when we seek diversity, we get excellence. This is a reflection of who we can be when we choose to be. How do we use our diversity as an asset? How do we use our difference as a way in which to leverage the best in who we are. I love this gymnastics team. The other reason I showed it, because in my next lifetime, I'm going to be a gymnast. So I'm just trying to... Howard, I'm priming. What has happened with all of what we've been seeing is that we've been coming together because of our grief. What does Marianne Williamson say about grief? Has anyone read any of her work on grief? Yeah? What does she say? What does she say on grief? We feel it. Yeah? You can be sad, yeah. But then what do you do with that sadness? Right, right. And that we all go through it. And as a nation, we're grieving. We're grieving. There isn't, I would venture to say, and you can't say absolutes because that's what then an assumption. I'm not trying to do that. Right? But I would venture to say anyone who's paid attention to the news has had at least some grief, has had some pain, has had some fear, has had moments of, I can't believe this is still happening, or I can't believe this happens, or how long will it keep going on? So what can we learn from our grief? What can we learn? How do we begin to heal? Yeah.
It can create an avenue for healing.
It can create an avenue for healing because we know something has to be different. But the difference begins with each one of us. It's not something that's just going to happen out there in society. We are society. So within, so without. I am indeed connected to you. Nobody makes you angry. You decide to use anger as a response. True or false? False. True, false? False. So who says false? Yeah. Both. Why?
Because you can be just sitting on a park bench and somebody can throw acid in your face. You're going to be pissed.
Mm-hmm.
You have a right to it.
Mm-hmm.
But you could be sitting on a park bench and it's a beautiful day and you just sit there with bigotry and hatred and anger just because you want to. I mean, it's like in Buddhism, every single aspect of life can be used for positive.
Or negative. And the same thing with bias. Say it quickly one more time.
In Buddhism, everything can be used for positive and for negative.
Thank you.
So even love can be used.
Oh, yeah,
for
yeah.
Hold on.
Okay.
Okay, we will hold.
In Buddhism, everything it can be used either in a positive way or a negative way. Even love.
Yeah.
You can have bad love. You can have good love. You can have bad hatred, and you can have, well, no, hatred, no. Righteous anger.
Okay.
So we can have good
So
anger and
there's
bad
two
anger.
sides to a coin. As a
Right.
chemist, we talk about stereoisomerism,
Right.
right? Anyone else a chemist? You're shaking your head like, oh, I talk about stereoisomerism every day. Every day. There's two sides. You're a chemist. Talk to us about stereoisomerism and what it has to do with what we're talking about here today. He's getting it.
Stereoisomerism. What it would be is if we were to take anger and then we channel a light, which would be truth,
Yeah.
you'd have two sides to it. It would rotate to the right,
Yeah.
and it'd have the capability to rotate to the left.
Yeah.
What's that saying is the way it's forms in that light frame kind of dictates the energy and how it rotates in truth.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you. Does that? Yeah. Thank you. For those people who, I'm not going to talk bad about art, but chemistry is a good thing too. Right? Diversity. It's more than skin deep. How many kids had flesh color crayons? When I was a kid, I read on the box flesh color. I put it on, it didn't look too fleshy. So I took them out of the box and with a brown crayon colored them and put them back in the box. Flesh colored, truth in advertising. Right? Now, my mother wasn't particularly happy. She was a nurse. Something wrong with sterility and things like that. But who we are, we're more than skin deep. So when we see violence perpetrated against an individual simply because of the color of their skin, it's because we weren't open and receptive to the humanity. We didn't see what we all said we had in common, our diversity, being human. Things we can do. Suspend judgment and listen. Suspend judgment and listen. Prejudice is what? Prejudge. The highest spiritual practice is self-observation without judgment. We begin to practice that. We then become more open to being less judgmental. We will always be judging. That's people. That's who we are. But to have active listening, that's part of how we begin to have a culture of peace. I hear you. Sawabona, Sakona, I see you, I hear you. Focus on what others are saying. That means don't go and what I do. I know this is what they're going to say and end with, because I got it. I got an A in that. Seek to understand another's perspective. Step in someone else's shoes. That's if they have them. Stand on the ground that they stand, if they can stand. Sit in the chair so that you can be with them. Lay on the floor so that you can hold them. That's part of seek to understand another's perspective. I'm not going to go through all these sort for me and ideas. That's just asking questions. Ask. What we say, don't make an assumption. Reflect back. Share. This is how I heard. This is what I heard. This is how I felt. These tie into the same questions Howard had asked us to have when we have conversations with the other, the they. And use nonverbal and verbal cues. Now, that's consistent in this culture. In other cultures, some nonverbal cues, touching, closeness, eye contact, is seen as disrespectful. That's why having conversation and asking. And if indeed we offend, what's the easiest thing to do? Apologize. I'm sorry. I usually open because I knew I was going to be in a more religious and faithful place here. I usually open, if I offend you, it is not my intention. Please excuse me and tell me afterwards so I can learn. Because I tend to have a little bit more inflammatory things up on the slides. But I was feeling a little bit centered. Receive feedback. What's one of the hardest things to do is hear somebody tell you you did what? We had a whole bunch of things that we just did. So we breathe, take a breath. That's a way of which getting connected to what do we have in common? Breath. All of these things allow us to begin to see yourself in others, to see others in you, to respect them, to show the dignity. Open, be open. That's what we are right now. We're seeking discovery. How do we create a culture of learning where we learn about each other as opposed to make assumptions about others? The listen, the restate. We've done all this, all right? Sometimes you just need a new perspective on things. Right? Sometimes we just need to step away, take a breath, rethink it, refocus. Sometimes we need to just say, you know what, this is not the time for this conversation. It's because I need space, not because you don't understand me. The you is a point. You don't control the you control you. Diversity, Noah, trust me. Now that's from my faith tradition. I grew up as an Episcopalian, and this is what we learned. We're all in the same boat. We're all in the same boat. And guess what? On that boat, in my faith, was every creature on earth. It didn't say which kind of rabbit. It didn't say what color frog. We're on the same boat. And what happens? If that boat sunk, what would have happened? We all would go down. As long as we continue to recognize that we're here together, one people, one earth, one planet, one community, brilliant because of our diversity, we have an opportunity to move beyond some of the grief, the fear, the terror. Our challenge is, how do we instill that in our institutions? Not just the police or other institutions that deny individuals their humanity, their dignity. There's a wonderful professor, and if you get a chance, look online at the smell of the place. The smell of the place. How many times you've been someplace and it just didn't feel right? You couldn't put your finger on it? Something didn't feel, ugh. You felt ill at ease. You didn't feel you could be your true self. You were feeling protected and needing to cover yourself. Part of this is that what he teaches us is to go beyond the traditional constructs of thinking, from constraint and being closed, to being able to reach and stretch, to take a risk. When Howard showed us the picture of the astronauts, Dr. Mae Jemison, when she was a child, she would lay on the ground and look up at the sky. And she knew that someday she could reach and she could stretch and she could be there because she believed she could. She was willing to stretch. She wasn't constrained by the fact that she had never seen another woman like another astronaut that looked like her, a black woman. She wasn't constrained. She said, I'm going to stretch. We get to do that. When we interact with people who are different than us, we get to stretch. Don't hold ourselves back, hold ourselves in a box. Be conscious of it and make the choice to interact differently, to learn something about somebody. Compliance is not the same as discipline. Compliance is an external mandate. Discipline is self-focused. We get to choose the discipline and how we show dignity. It's a conscious act. It is a conscious act. And we all get to control that ourselves. Control versus support. I'm not here to control other people. I'm here what? To support. I believe in community. I'm here to support you. I hope you're here to support me. Contract versus trust. Trust, the confidence born out of character and competence. The confidence born out of character and competence. I do not have to have an abiding agreement with you to show your respect. But I can trust that you're a good person. And if I am going to make an assumption, I will assume good intent. A new way of thinking, how we interact, the smell of the place. There's a program, and Howard hit some of it already, Be an Ally. If you haven't done this already, encourage your organization, and maybe you do it here. It's a 1-hour session on ouch, speak up, your silence hurts. When we see behaviors of disrespect, what do we do with it? Do we walk away? Do we act like we didn't see it and then say, oh, I probably should have said something? Speak up, because your silence hurts. It's the price of silent collusion. If you don't say something when you see a disrespect shown to someone else, other people around you think it's okay. Other people around you think it's okay. That's the silent collusion. Someone makes an inappropriate comment about someone else and you hear it and it bothers you in some way, you get to choose what you do with it. You can walk away, or you can even say something like, ouch. What happens when you say ouch? People are like, what happened? It's a pause, right? The bystander, you're a bystander, we're all bystanders. We get to act. That's again, I keep going back to choice, 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 conscious choice, conscious choice, conscious choice. We get to make it. So when we see hostility in our community, we can either add to it by keeping to fuel that fire, or we can choose to do something about it. We can become an effective ally, as Howard told us earlier. Things you can do: assume good intent and explain the impact. I know you mean well, but that actually hurts. I know that officer meant well when he made the stop. When he made the stop. What happened after that? Don't know. Ask a question. What do you mean? Don't make an assumption. Ask a question. What do you mean? How we begin to communicate with one another. If we don't ask, if I don't understand, I can make my own story about whatever you said. And my story may not have anything to do with what you were telling me. Interrupt and redirect. Excuse me, let's not go there. Some things we just don't need to have a conversation about. Your mother has ugly shoes. Let's not go there. Or, I'm thankful she has shoes. Choice. Brought into universal human behavior. I think that applies to everybody. Boy, all black men create crimes. All black men create crimes. Say what? Let's not go there. Let's not go there. You hear that. There are times we hear people make these kind of comments. Oh, those people always do that. Who's those people? If we don't say something, other people believe you're in collusion with that. Right? Make it individual. Are you speaking about somebody in particular? Are you talking about someone in particular? People with glasses aren't very bright. Are you talking about somebody in particular? You can say ouch. What happens when you hear ouch? What do? You stop. You pause.
You try to identify the cause for...
Right. You try to identify the cause for hurt, and then we get to choose to do something with that. And you can speak up. Dignity and Respect campaign. It's a campaign going across the nation. The goal is, will we all practice it? Right? There's a calendar. You can go online for Dignity and Respect and download a calendar, and it gives a list of basic activities that you can do to show dignity and respect. I think day 1 is smile. Day 2 is hello. And hello, sawubona. Sakona, aloha. Yeah. Making the world a better place for all. Who? All. Didn't say some people. Everybody. Everybody. Speak the truth even if your voice shakes, but remember, it's just your truth. It's the world as I see it. But you need to speak it. Right? Every person deserves dignity and respect. With that, I'm going to sit down and we're going to do some questions.